Professional baseball, the national pastime, and it all started in Cincinnati.
That's the way I would see the team in 1919, a very good ball club, very solid, excellent pitching. I think it was a pretty legitimate series because I don't think anybody really went out there and tried to show it.
I didn't go for a no-hitter in either ball game till the last inning, and I would give them everything I had. No let-ups, no changes, nothing cheap. If I was going to get beat, I was going to get beat on my strength.
They call us the Ragamuffins. We weren't supposed to win the pennant, but we had a great bunch of guys that really played well together, and we had a lot of fun on the way to winning the pennant.
We were killers. We basically knew how to win. If we were 1 or 2 runs down, the other team was in trouble. They knew that, and we knew it as well.
And he fires, Rose swings. There it is! There it is! Get out! Get out! All right! Hit number 4192.
Reds, the official history of baseball's oldest team.
Let's make it clear that Cincinnati is a tremendous place to play baseball. I was born here, right close to Kluszewski Field. I was a Reds fan when I was a kid, and I'll be a Reds fan when I'm an old man. And it's just something that's in your blood, and I think there's many, many people in this town that feel the same way about the Reds that I do.
Ever since the late 1850s, baseball has played a major role in the history of Cincinnati. Back then, the game was played in an uncivilized manner by the elite youth of the city, one of whom, William Howard Taft, later became President of the United States. The Cincinnati Baseball Club was founded in 1866, and in 2 years, 4 of the so-called First 9 were paid professionals. A year later, Henry Ellard funded the first fully professional team, whose leaders were Harry Wright, the team's founder and manager, and his younger brother George, who became the Red Stockings' first star. The team played its home games at the Lincoln Park grounds, and in their inaugural season, the now paid professionals didn't lose a single game. The only blemish on their record was a lone tie, but then a year later, the Red Stockings disbanded after the 1870 season. In 1876, the Red Stockings became a charter member of the National League, but they soon fled the newly formed group in a dispute over the sale of beer on Sundays and joined the American Association in 1882. It was there that third baseman Hick Carpenter and 40-game winner Will White led the team to a league championship in 1882. Those Red Stockings of the American Association played their games at a ballpark situated at the intersection of Findlay and Western, and except for an early change in the field configuration caused by sun problems, home plate would remain in approximately the same spot for nearly a century. In 1890, the Reds returned to the National League after a 9-year absence, but the events of the rest of the decade proved to be rather uneventful, even though the legendary Charles Comiskey did manage the team for 3 years. Some of the better-known Reds of the 90s included native Ohioan Buck Ewing, the team's manager for 5 seasons, and Dummy Hoy, baseball's first mute player. But the real star of the times came at the turn of the century.
In 1902, they built the Palace of the Fans, and that was the first ballpark in America that had distinct architectural overtones. It was patterned after the World's Fair architecture in Chicago. It had a terrific look. It had a very spacious look to it. It had a lot of architectural flair, but it didn't have many seats.
That was a problem because the popularity of the Reds was expanding along with the city. The reasons included August Gary Herman, the Reds' dynamic president, and players like 1905's batting champion Cy Seymour and pitcher Noodles Hahn. The result was the building of a new stadium with more seats, Redland Field, which was completed in 1912. Some of the park's first big names included third baseman Heine Groh, who used the famous bottle bat, and Hall of Fame pitcher Christy Mathewson, who managed the Reds from 1916 to 1918. However, it wasn't until 1919 that the Reds reached the promised land. Under the guidance of manager Pat Moran, the Reds won their first National League pennant, outdistancing the Giants by 9 games. That year, the pitching was provided by Hod Eller, who won 20 games, 19-game winner Dutch Ruther, and left-handed ace Slim Sally, who won 21. The hitting came mainly from Hall of Fame center fielder Ed Rausch, who hit over 310 times in a Reds uniform and led the league in 1919 with a .321 average. So the Reds moved into the World Series against the Chicago White Sox with great expectations and came out winners 5-3 for their first World Championship. The victory, however, was tainted when almost a year later, several White Sox players were accused of throwing the series. With its facts, opinions, and innuendos, the subsequent trial just about ruined baseball. And although the 8 players were later acquitted, they were banned from baseball for life by Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis, thus casting a pall on the Reds' triumph.
If there was anyone that really attempted to throw that series, it was the pitchers, Williams and Cicotti. If you read carefully, you see it all the way through. I don't think the rest of the players did anything but went out and played their best. So I think the series belonged to the Reds, and I'm not a rabid fan by any means. I'm a historian and a researcher, so I can say that in all honesty. I think the game belonged to the Reds, and the series was won honestly.
Baseball, for some reason or another, is a big part of your life in Cincinnati. Everybody's associated with Mom, Dad, kids. Everybody's associated with it. It's kind of like playing almost in your hometown. Everybody knows you, you know everybody else.
The 1920s might have been a roaring time for most Americans, but that wasn't the case in Cincinnati, where the Reds played follow the leader for much of the decade. The Reds were nothing more than also-rans throughout the 20s, although several stars like pitcher Dolph Luke did make an indelible mark on the team's history. In 1923, the Cuban-born Luke won 27 games and had a 1.93 ERA. Then there was 6'5" Epa Rixey, the Reds' all-time winningest pitcher with 179, who had 3 20-win seasons in his first 5 years in Cincinnati. But even those 2 pitching greats couldn't stop the Reds' decline, and by the end of the 20s, the team's fortunes, just like the country's economy, had collapsed. By the early 30s, the Depression was fully entrenched in our society, and the Reds were fully entrenched in last place. But then Powell Crosley came to the rescue. Crosley had made his fortune in the radio business in Cincinnati and believed that the Reds should remain in the city. So he bought the team in 1934 and entrusted the baseball side of the operation to Larry MacPhail. Crosley and MacPhail proved to be innovators with ideas like night baseball, which found its roots in Cincinnati in 1935, when more than 20,000 fans showed up for the Major League's first night game. In September of 1936, MacPhail was replaced by Warren Giles, who would eventually turn the Reds into contenders, but not right away, even though the team did have talented players, like Hall of Famer Ernie Lombardi, who had joined the Reds in 1932. In his 10 seasons in Cincinnati, Lombardi batted over 307 times and won a batting title in 1938.
When he swung at a ball, he usually hit it. And he could hit it just any direction that he wanted to. He could take a ball low and outside, and I've seen him hit shots over the left field fence. Another characteristic about him that was so unusual, I've seen him catch many, many balls with his bare hand and just throw it back and never make any show of emotion or anything, except maybe try to knock a pitcher off a mound when he did it.
Some of those pitchers who Lombardi tried to knock off the mound were already there too, and the best of the group turned out to be one the Reds had acquired in 1933, Paul Derringer.
Cincinnati Ball Club is going to finish higher in the race than they did last year. And one of the main reasons why I think they will finish higher is because this boy right here, Paul Derringer, I think will be the best pitcher in the National League this year.
As things turned out, Derringer's best year wouldn't come for a while, and the Reds still floundered in the late 30s. No matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't seem to get a leg up on their opponents. Then in 1937, things in Cincinnati went from bad to worse when the Great Flood left more than 500,000 people homeless, including the Reds, as Crosley Field suffered from the same fate as the rest of the city. But help for both Cincinnati and the Reds was on the way. In 1938, Giles hired Bill McKechnie to manage the team, and McKechnie succeeded almost immediately, guiding the team from last place to fourth with his distinct style.
He was a defensive manager, always had good pitchers around. McKechnie was a great man on the field and off of the field. He was a type of man that you never feared, but everybody respected him, and that's what it takes to be a good manager.
It also helps to have good players, like pitcher Bucky Walters, who came from the Phillies in 1938 and teamed with Derringer to give the Reds some punch on the mound.
Bucky was a great competitor pitcher. I've never seen a pitcher that was more of a competitor. He was a big clown when he wasn't pitching. But if you mess around on the bench when he was pitching, he'd just soon fight you sitting on the bench.
Derringer had the good fastball, but not quite as fast as Bucky. But Derringer had about 5 different types of curveballs and threw them at different speeds and outstanding control.
When Bucky started going good, Derringer started going good, which goes back to hitting's contagious, pitching's contagious.
For Johnny Vandermeer himself, pitching was certainly contagious in June of 1938, when he accomplished what is now considered the single greatest pitching feat ever by throwing 2 consecutive no-hitters.
I didn't go for a no-hitter in either ball game till the last inning. Then I went for it. So I started both those ball games in the 9th inning and said I had 20 good pitches left, and I would give them everything I had. No let-ups, no changes, nothing cheap. If I was going to get beat, I was going to get beat on my strength.
Vandermeer's strength was his fastball, but on June 11th against the Boston Braves, he relied on finesse.
One of the few days that I was throwing the ball exactly where I wanted to throw it all day. About 80% of the plays were ground balls in the infield. I was throwing a lot of sinkers. It was an entirely different pitch ball game than the second one.
For one thing, the second no-hitter came in the first night game at Ebbets Field, and that in itself presented Vandermeer with some unique problems.
The first thing that happened was they gave me a night from my home in New Jersey. And that is the jinx right there. You usually don't get by the 3rd inning. I thought about that too. And then also the fact that you're playing in Brooklyn and they'll let you know before you even throw the first pitch over there that we're going to get you. But one of the things that came up that night was McPhail kept selling tickets, and he didn't stop. And the fire department came in because he had them sitting in the aisles and you name it. I got up to warm up 3 times, and I had to sit down 3 times. So we really didn't get started that ball game that night till about 9 o'clock. So there was a lot of things that went different in that second game to put a lot of heat on me.
Fortunately, it was Vandermeer who put the heat on the Dodgers, and this time he relied on his strength.
I was busting the ball real good. I'd probably thrown the ball 95, 96, 97 miles an hour. And along about the 8th inning, when I probably started to lose a little bit off of my fastball, we started throwing curves, and everybody kept looking for fastballs then, so that really helped me.
Double no-hit Johnny Vandermeer, a baseball legend. The 1939 season saw the Reds jump into the pennant fray with a well-stocked team. The pitchers were among the league's best, and the hitters, especially Frank McCormick, proved to be more than adequate. McCormick led the league with 209 hits, and his 128 RBIs were the highest in the National League. That output helped the Reds outlast the Cardinals and reach the World Series for the first time in 20 years. Unfortunately for the Reds, the powerful New York Yankees lay in waiting. And as things turned out, manager Bill McKechnie and his Reds proved to be little more than practice partners for Charlie Keller and the rest of the Yanks as the New Yorkers swept the series in 4 games. The 4th game epitomized the Reds' frustrations as the Yanks tied the game in the 9th and rallied for 3 more in the 10th. The last run scoring after catcher Lombardi lay prone at home plate in a play now remembered as his famous snooze.
What happened on that particular play was never explained by the media because they called it before they knew what it was all about, and it stayed that way. The ball came up and hit Ernie in the cup, and he was just paralyzed. He couldn't move, and the ball laid probably about 15 feet in the back of him. And Wallace did not back up the play. Only mistake I ever seen Wallace making all the time I spent with that great pitcher. But Mom never said one single word. Took the whole rap for the whole business. Kept him out of the Hall of Fame for a long time.
Fortunately, the play didn't ruin the Reds as a team. In fact, the next year, they went right back to winning, starting on opening day against the Cubs, when Ivel Goodman's homer led the way. From there, the Reds charged into first place and didn't look back until despondent backup catcher Willard Hershberger took his own life midway through the season.
We were something like 15 or 18 games out in front, and Hershberger committed suicide. Our number 2 catcher behind Lombardi, who was a fine number 2 catcher, receiving as well as a little hitter, and he was just an excellent guy. We put the black armbands on. We kept them on for 30 days. From there to that 30 days, I don't believe we won over 5 or 6 games. Our lead dwindled down to where we finally had about a 3.5 game lead, but we built it back up. And when we pulled those armbands off, it's like taking that shadow and bringing the sunshine back in.
By early October, the sun was really shining on Cincinnati, with the Reds in the World Series again, this time facing the Tigers. Unfortunately, Ernie Lombardi was injured, and a coach, Jimmy Wilson, had to catch. Incredibly, Wilson performed superbly and wound up as the Reds' leading hitter in a series that went 7 games. In the finale, the Reds' Paul Derringer and the Tigers' Bobo Newsom staged a classic pitching matchup. Detroit led 1-0 until the 7th, when Frank McCormick doubled to lead off the inning. Then Jimmy Ripple doubled to right, and McCormick scored to tie the game. Jimmy Wilson sacrificed Ripple to third, and after Lombardi was walked intentionally, Billy Myers hit a sacrifice fly to center, which scored Ripple with the go-ahead run. Derringer then retired the final 6 Detroit batters without a hitch, and the Reds had won their 2nd World Championship, 21 years after the first.
I don't care what people say about opening days in New York or LA or Chicago or wherever. Cincinnati's unique. Everybody gets involved. It's a World Series atmosphere. There is the Findlay Market Parade, which is a traditional event. It's just a very, very special day.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Like most everyone else, the Reds were affected by World War II, and with many regulars in the armed forces, 15-year-old Joe Nuxhall was afforded a unique opportunity, the chance to become the youngest major leaguer ever.
I was sitting there, you know, a young kid, just 2 weeks prior to that, pitching against 12 and 13-year-old kids, and admiring how Stan Musial and Whitey Kurowski, I mean, they're just hitting ropes all over the place, and I'm saying, boy, these guys can really pound that ball. So all of a sudden, Mr. McKechnie yells, Joe, and I'm sitting down at the far end of the dugout, and I don't, no way he's talking to me, you know, another Joe on the ball club, and so I don't pay any attention. And he yells a little louder, Joe, and this time I look at him, he says, yeah, you go warm up. And all of a sudden I said, holy smoke, I'm in trouble now. And then things really started to sink in. This is the major leagues. This isn't Ford's Ball Diamond and Hamilton. That's Stan Musial hitting. That's not Billy Jones. The end result was 2/3 of an inning, 5 walks, a wild pitch, 2 hits, and 5 earned runs. And people say, well, that wasn't too bad for 9 innings. I said, timeout. That was for 2/3 of an inning.
Nuxhall later went on to have a fine career with the Reds, but it's doubtful his debut at age 15 will ever be duplicated. After the war, the Reds' best pitcher was unquestionably Ewell Blackwell. In 1947, Blackwell won 22 games and pitched a no-hitter, but it was his buggy whip motion which earned him the respect and attention of his opponents.
Just picture a man that was 6'6" and weighed about 170 pounds, and had arms just about as long as his body, throwing from third base. That would be the impression I would have as far as hitting against Ewell Blackwell. He made a lot of good players ill on that particular day that he was going to pitch.
Gene Mount, we talked about Blackwell one day, and he said, here I am, a utility ball player with the Boston Braves. But he said, all I had to do was when we were going to play Cincinnati is look at the paper and see that Ewell Blackwell was going to pitch for the Reds. And I knew that Sibby Sisti, the regular shortstop, would come down sick that day. He would pull a muscle slightly, something he wouldn't have to play. I would have to face Blackwell. And he said, and that was impossible. He was called the Whip. That's exactly what he was.
As a team, however, the Reds hardly had anyone's respect throughout the 40s, and it wasn't until the beginning of the 50s that they began to instill fear in their opponents. One of their main weapons was Ted Kluszewski, who had driven into town in 1947, but really didn't find his home run stroke until 1954, when he led the league with 49. Of Klu, it was said he was so strong he could hit the ball out of any park in America, including Yellowstone.
To be a good hitter, you should make good contact with the good part of the bat. But because I was a lot stronger than the average ball player, I could miss-hit a lot and still get my base hits. A good example being jammed. Most guys, when they get jammed, will pop it up in the infield or hit a ground ball to the infield. But when I got jammed, I had enough strength to power the ball over the infield, which then turned out to be a base hit. I've hit broken bat home runs with one hand. These are the things that I could do because basically I was strong.
Klu was not only a very strong man with very large arms, he was also a renegade, setting a sartorial style that became uniquely his own.
I don't know whether you've ever had a 1950 uniform on, but it's made out of heavy gauge flannel that you wouldn't believe. And when it got wet, it got twice as heavy. And what had happened to me is I swung the bat, my left arm would hang up on the sleeve. So I said, let me have my sleeves cut down a little bit. And somebody said, well, they won't let you. That's the way the uniform is. So I asked them a couple times, and when they refused, I finally just took the scissors out and cut them off. And then it became a kind of a symbol. I wouldn't be caught without it, I guess.
Thanks to Klu, another symbol the Reds wouldn't have been caught without in the 50s was the long ball. They hit them with regularity, becoming along the way one of the most powerful teams in the history of the game.
Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Come on, baby, let me thrill your soul. Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Roll all night long. Come on, baby, yes, this is something I just can't miss. Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Roll all night long.
Many of the explosions at Crosley Field in the 50s were provided by Hall of Famer Frank Robinson, who joined the Reds in 1956 and immediately earned the respect of his teammates.
They talk about Mantle, they talk about Willie Mays, they talk about Hank Aaron, and I think because we played in the Midwest, he never got his due. He was by far the best player during that era because when the game was on the line, he'd steal you that base. He'd hit that home run.
By far the greatest player I ever played with. There was nothing Frank couldn't do. He could hit, run, field, throw, super player, and he was the type guy that you couldn't wait to get up in the 8th or 9th inning because with one swing he could turn the ball game around at any time.
In his first season, Robinson turned the ball game around many times with his then rookie record-tying 38 homers. That was also part of the team's National League record-tying 221 homers in a single season. Robinson's 38 led the way, followed by Wally Post's 36, Ted Kluszewski's 35, Gus Bell's 29, and Ed Bailey's 28.
When you have that kind of muscle, I guess is what I'm trying to say, in a lineup, pitchers cannot really relax a little bit. If they do, you're in trouble. And we'd go into 6th, 7th inning down 4 or 5 runs, knowing it wasn't over. You know, if we could hold them right there, we got a shot at it.
Actually, the Reds had a pretty good shot at winning the pennant in 1956, as manager Bertie Tebbetts drove them near the top of the league by mid-season.
The biggest thing of all has been the fact that the guys think they can win. Our pitching is very much stronger this year, and Frankie Robinson has patched up a hole in left field, which meant a lot. I think good spirit and different guys getting hot at different times and carrying the club.
One of those different guys was pitcher Brooks Lawrence, who at one point won 13 straight games en route to finishing the season with a 19-10 record. The 56 Reds were also solid up the middle with shortstop Roy McMillan and second baseman Johnny Temple, who were as good a double play combination as any in the league. Then there was center fielder Gus Bell, who had come from the Pirates in 1953 and immediately drove in more than 100 runs the next 2 years. But despite all that talent, the Reds fell short in 56 and 57 and 8. So by the 1959 season, changes were necessary, one of which saw Bell move to right field with Vada Pinson taking over in center field. Pinson was a different sort of player, and he brought to the Reds an added dimension which helped both him and the team.
Having speed, which was a normal thing around in Oakland, everybody could run. I was able to outrun a few infield hits and things like that, but it made it easier because we had some veteran ball players on the team. And these people sort of taken the pressure off of me. And Frank Robinson was there from the same hometown, so this all helped. And as time was going on, the season was over and I had 200 hits.
Pinson, in fact, would have more than 200 hits 4 times in his 10-year Reds career. And it was he, along with Frank Robinson, who formed the nucleus of the Reds outfield as the 60s began under the guidance of new manager Fred Hutchinson. Hutch had taken over from Mayo Smith during the 59 season. And after a slow start in 1960, he had the Reds on the move in 1961. That season, everything fell in place for the Reds as they wound up winning the National League flag. It was also the year that relief pitcher Jim Brosnan chose to write a book about the Reds called The Pennant Race, a chronicle of the team's success throughout 1961.
To say that the 1961 season was something special is an understatement. As a pitcher, it was my most memorable moment in baseball. As a writer, winning the pennant was something of a bonus. We were not expected to win, but we did. That gave my book both focus and title. I dedicated the book at the time to my teammates who made it possible. That's the way I felt then. That's the way I feel now. Here then is our story. Like most baseball seasons in Cincinnati, the 1961 National League schedule opened to a packed house at Crosley Field. That was nice because after last year's 6th place finish and 6 weeks of a horrible spring training, we had little indication that a good season was in prospect. But in the offseason, new general manager Bill DeWitt had acquired Joey Jay from the Braves to help bolster the pitching staff. And for our offense, he did pry Gene Freese away from the White Sox. So that day, Wally Post came through in grand style, hitting a home run to back the 4-hit pitching of Jim O'Toole in our 7-1 win over the Cubs. After that, we played okay for a while, but then we went out west and just plain fell apart. We wound up losing 8 straight games and found ourselves in the National League cellar. But then things began to turn around for us. In the middle of a 9-game winning streak, Joey Jay pitched a 1-hit shutout against the Phils for his first win as a Red, and that seemed to really get him and the rest of us going in the right direction. Everyone started hitting well. Our bench, with guys like Jerry Lynch, was really making a contribution, and by mid-June we were in first place. But the long, hot summer was just beginning. It's tough to put a finger on one specific thing that turned the 61 season in our favor. Everyone seems to have his own idea.
If there was a turning point, I think it happened midsummer, probably early July, up in Milwaukee. Milwaukee had a fantastic ball club with the Spawns and the Aarons and the Matthews and all those people. We were playing a weekend series up there, and we won a doubleheader on a Sunday afternoon from them. Spawn pitched one of the ball games. We beat Spawny. In the second game, Tony Cloninger pitched. We won a doubleheader from them in Milwaukee.
My turning point in 1961, though, I think was a big 4-game series in the Coliseum. In that first ball game, Drysdale was told to intentionally walk Frank Robinson. And in the process of walking Frank Robinson, he knocked him down 3 times and hit him the 4th. It was something because the umpire did throw Drysdale out of the game. And we ended up winning 3 out of 4 of those ball games, and it was an easy September for us. Nobody got real close to us, not closer than the 3 games.
As we were fighting for the pennant that summer, Frank Robinson was not only our best player, but the best player in the league. He finished the year with a batting average of .323 and added 37 homers and 124 RBIs to win the National League Most Valuable Player Award.
In '61, winning the MVP, I think it meant recognition, number one. I'd been in the shadows of Mays, and it's not a bad shadow to be in, but still you want to be out and see the sunlight yourself once in a while. Winning the MVP award kind of said, hey, Frank Robinson is a pretty good ball player himself. He carried us for about 145 games, Frank. When they asked me one of the finest athletes in the National League when I played, I named Frank Robinson.
He was such a good team ball player, and he was such a spark plug for us. You know, how he went our ball club, and he just seemed to be able to get the best out of everybody.
Of course, Robbie didn't do it alone. He was helped out by our surprising but steady pitching staff, led by 21-game winner Joey J. And we had some other good pitchers, too, like Bob Perky, who won 16 that year, and lefty Jim O'Toole, who went 19-9. It was a good thing they did, too, because for a while there, we needed all the wins we could get. We even dropped into second place for a while, but came on strong in the end and won the pennant. Quite an accomplishment for a team no one expected too much from.
They call us the Ragamuffins. We weren't supposed to win the pennant, but we had a great bunch of guys that really played well together, and we had a lot of fun on the way to winning the pennant.
One more thing. I don't think many of the guys will ever forget the night we clinched the pennant. We had been in Chicago, and when we landed at the airport, a noisy, cheering crowd greeted us. Fans gathered at intersections along the 10-mile route to downtown Cincinnati, and Fountain Square was jammed with people who listened to a broadcast of the Pirate-Dodger game from loudspeakers set up at both ends of the square. When Bob Skinner of the Pirates caught a fly ball for the last Dodger out, bedlam broke loose. We had done it, National League champions. When I started my journal of the 1961 season, I had no idea it would end up as it did. A dream season. I'll never forget it.
Reds fans, however, would probably like to forget the World Series that year when their beloved team faced the powerful Yankees of New York, led by the great Mickey Mantle and the record-setting Roger Maris. The team surprisingly split the first two games before they headed back to Cincinnati.
Scored tied 2-2, ninth inning, and if ever it was pitch measuring time, it is right now. 2-2, and Roger Maris at bat. Bob Perky pitching. There's one. It is deep to right field, and that ball is going, it is gone. And the Yankees lead 3-2.
New York held on that day, and from that point on, the Reds were no match for the Yankees, who won Game 4 7-0 and Game 5 13-5. The end might have been disappointing, but the 1961 season was a memorable one in Cincinnati.
The one thing I used to do as a youth was try to catch the players as they pulled up around in the clubhouse. And one of the things I used to do was always try to hustle gloves or balls. And one time Frank Robinson gave me a glove out of the trunk of his car, which was a big event in a guy's life at the age of 9 or 10.
For the Reds, there was no pennant in '62, and even when Pete Rose arrived in 1963, there wasn't much reason to believe that he alone would bring the team back to the top of the National League.
He was just a local kid that had a chance to make the ball club. He wasn't even a regular, in high school. It wasn't until he was about 20 years old that Pete blossomed. What nobody realized at the time is the heart that was beating so deep and so hard inside that man. He's one of a kind.
He was a tremendous athlete, a tremendous competitor, and he was really self-made, because when he broke into the big leagues in 1963, no one could have foreseen the future that Pete had. And we used to say in spring training, the guys would take a vote of the 25-man roster at that time. 24 of the 25 guys say, no, he's not going to make the ball club. The only guy that said, yeah, he thought he had a chance was the guy's job he took, Don Blassingame.
Nobody gave him much of a chance to stay there that year because he was still very young. But he was a determined little guy, and I think he's going to make it.
Rose, of course, made it right away, winning the league's Rookie of the Year award. That must have been especially satisfying to manager Fred Hutchinson, whose toughness rivaled that of Rose.
Fred was a big, strong man, a man's man, and the players respected him tremendously.
He was hard-nosed, and he wanted his players to be hard-nosed, and don't let anybody buffalo you, and that's the type of a guy he was when he played, and that's what he demanded out of his players.
Everybody feared Hutch, and that's what made him such a great manager.
Sadly, Fred Hutchinson died of cancer after the 1964 season, and in tribute, his uniform number will never be worn again. The 1965 season began with Dick Sisler as the manager of a Reds team that many thought would mount a serious challenge for the pennant. One reason was the addition of Tony Perez, who became the Reds' regular first baseman. Perez hit just 12 homers that year, but his potential was clear to see. And along with Robinson and Pinson, league RBI leader Darren Johnson and Tommy Harper, the Reds' offense was the best in the league. The pitchers were pretty good too, especially Sammy Ellis, who won 22 games, and Jim Maloney, who not only won 20 games, but also threw 2 of his 3 career no-hitters that year, the first of which came on June 14th. And as things turned out that night, he actually lost the game to the Mets in 11 innings, despite also having 18 strikeouts.
That night, I had the best stuff that I ever had. I was literally, for 10 innings, I was unhittable. Billy Cowan was a leadoff hitter, and then he always tells people that the first night he came up there to face me, I struck him out on 3 pitches, and he went back to the dugout. And he told the whole team, he said, just forget it. In my mind, I always said that I'm going to get 27 outs. And so then the first hitter, if I got the first hitter out, I got 26 more. So as it turned out, I ended up with a 3 and had 5 one-hitters. There were some chances there. If a couple hits would have gone the other ways, might have been a whole bunch of no-hitters. You never know.
Unfortunately, the Reds failed to win again that year, and even traded Frank Robinson to the Orioles after the season. Losing a team leader was tough, and it wasn't until late in 1967 that a new one showed up in the presence of Johnny Bench. Although he was just 20 years old, Bench led by example, and that example was hard to ignore.
I never see nobody come, from the minors and do what he do behind the plate. He took care of everything, took care of the pitchers, and he had control of the game. It don't look like he was 20 or 21 years old. He's just a guy who came to the big league to stay and be a superstar.
When I got up to Cincinnati, I felt like I had the ability to play. And we were on the threshold at that time of developing into what soon became the Big Red Machine. So for me, it was a simple matter of day in and day out being able to play with those great players, being surrounded by them, took a lot of pressure off me, and it made playing every day easy for me.
One thing that wasn't easy for Reds fans was having to say goodbye to Crosley Field in 1970. After 58 memory-filled years, the last game was played on June 24th. For many Cincinnati baseball fans, it was hard to imagine that there would no longer be any terrace in the outfield, or Siebler suit sign, or sun and moon deck in right field. But like most everything else, old Crosley Field fell victim to progress. And on that last night, home plate was taken away by helicopter and transported across town to serve as a link between Cincinnati baseball past, present, and future. That future meant Riverfront Stadium, a multi-purpose structure which opened on June 30th with more than 50,000 fans and the first all-AstroTurf field. It also became part of baseball folklore almost overnight when Pete Rose made All-Star history the night of July 14th. But the real attraction during the 1970 season was the Reds themselves. At the beginning of the year, Sparky Anderson was named as the new manager, and Anderson brought with him a fresh new outlook that worked to his and his team's advantage.
I was a naive young man of 35 years old, my first time in the big leagues, and I had so much enthusiasm that I never thought there was such a thing that you could lose.
For a while, it looked like Sparky was clairvoyant, as the Reds got off to the greatest start in baseball history, winning 70 of their first 100 games. Offensively, the Reds were without peers in 1970. Not only could they hit, but they had speed too, in the person of Bobby Tolan, who led the league with 57 stolen bases to go along with his .316 average. By now, it was also apparent that the foundation for the Big Red Machine was firmly in place. Sparky Anderson was secure as manager, and then there was Pete Rose, who in the mid-70s would eventually wind up at third base after playing second, left, and right in his early years with the Reds. Third baseman Tony Perez, who had 90 RBIs at the 1970 All-Star break, would ultimately settle in at first, and behind the plate was Johnny Bench, who was in the process of leading the league in both homers and RBIs. Together, those four were the first parts of the Big Red Machine, which by now was well on its way toward winning the 1970 Western Division title. With Bench as the league's MVP, the Reds found themselves in the divisional playoffs against Pittsburgh, where in Game 1, Gary Nolan shut down the Pirates in a 3-0 victory. The Reds also won Game 2, and when Ty Klein scored the go-ahead run in the 8th inning of Game 3, the Reds were on the verge of clinching the pennant.
Swung on a ground ball at Helms. He has it. He'll flip it to May. The Reds win the National League flag. And the celebration breaks loose. And the Reds mob Don Gullett. They are all over him. They pick up Sparky Anderson. Up in the air goes Sparky as the Reds win the National League flag.
The Reds entered the World Series as favorites to defeat the Baltimore Orioles, but the Orioles had lost to the Mets a year earlier and felt they had something to prove. That would soon become evident, but not before a controversial play involving Bernie Carbo set the series tone. With the score tied at 3 in the 6th inning of Game 1, Carbo was called out at the plate, even though the evidence would later indicate otherwise.
There's no way possible he ever tagged it. No way! Get out of there!
But bad calls didn't beat the Reds that year. Brooks Robinson did. Brooks was spectacular, repeatedly robbing the Reds of hit after hit, turning the Fall Classic into his personal showcase. Fittingly, Robinson would be responsible for the last out in the Orioles' 5-game series victory. For the Reds, losing was disappointing, but then again, the 70s were just beginning. 1971, however, was a terrible year for the Reds, as they finished 4 games under 500. Changes were needed, and in the offseason, general manager Bob Howsam sent second baseman Tommy Helms to the Houston Astros, along with first baseman Lee May. In exchange, the Reds got infielder Dennis Menke, outfielder Cesar Geronimo, pitcher Jack Billingham, outfielder Ed Armbrister, and the key to the deal, second baseman Joe Morgan.
We were in the room in Houston, and I'll never forget Bob Howsam saying, "We have just made a trade with Houston, and in a half hour they're coming down to this room and join us, and we will go to the press room and announce it." And he told us all what the deal was. And I said, "Bob, you have just won the pennant for the Cincinnati Reds." I said, "This is the best trade to me that you'll ever make in your lifetime."
As things turned out in 1972, it didn't take Morgan too long to show his worth to the Reds, leading the league in runs scored, while sparking the team to its 2nd division title in 3 years. Once again, the Reds faced the Pittsburgh Pirates in the championship series. But this time, things weren't so easy, as the series went a full 5 games.
It came to the 9th inning, and we were down by a run, and I'm on the on-deck circle leading off the inning against Dave Justy, one of the great right-handed relievers in history, basically. And people were hollering in the stands, "Johnny, Johnny," and somebody said, "It's your mother." And I turned around and I looked at her and she said, "Hit me a home run." And I sort of glowed. I thought, "Mom, I wish it were that easy, and I wish it weren't Dave Justy." But the change hit in the air to deep right is called by Al Michaels. We'll live on.
1-2. The wind. And the pitch to Bench. Change hit in the air to deep right field. Back goes Clemente. At the fence. She's done!
When Johnny hit that home run to right field, and everybody, everybody said, "Well, here we are." And then I got a base hit, and Foster ran for me, and he scored on the white pitch, and that was great going to the World Series.
The stretch. And the 1-1 pitch to McRae. In the dirt. It's a wild pitch. Here comes Foster. The Reds win the pennant. Bob Moose throws a wild pitch, and the Reds have won the National League pennant.
The reward for that was another trip to the World Series, and this time the Reds found themselves facing the upstart Oakland A's. Unlike their previous trip to the series in 1970, the Reds played well, but so did the A's, and Cincinnati found itself frustrated once again.
We should have won that World Series, no question about it. But they had a great baseball team. They did so many things that were right in that series, and they still beat us in 7 games. We were the best club, and they're the best team I've ever played against in my 18 years.
The Reds might have been losing World Series, but all the while the Big Red machine was getting even stronger. By now, Morgan was fulfilling Anderson's prophecy as the best second baseman in the game, and his partner at short, Dave Concepcion, was maturing rapidly.
We didn't bring Davey up here expecting him to carry the load. Davey just had a job to do, and he went about it.
Up the middle. Concepcion, a fine play to throw in time. What a play.
Took him some time to get his feet on the ground, but he became a tremendous player and a big part of their Big Red Machine.
Ground ball. Look out now, it's going to be close at second. A great play by Concepcion.
Concepcion was just a baby. He was just a kid, 157 pounds then, and he reminds me of a young fawn. I said, his legs aren't real strong yet, but I said, watch him. I said, he's like a ballet dancer. He's one of those people that it's so easy for him doing everything.
For most of 1973, everything was easy for the Reds, too, until they ran into a roadblock in the League Championship Series. Despite winning 99 games, the Mets' excellent pitching staff shut down the Reds and won the series in 5 games. But the disappointment of 1973 would eventually be forgotten in the euphoria of 1975, when the Reds finally reached the top of the baseball world. After a slow start, the Reds came alive in June, and by the All-Star break had taken a 12.5-game lead. On their way toward winning 108 games, the Reds were clearly the best team in baseball.
We just toyed with people. We played different lineups all the time. I'd give guys 2 days off, 2 at a time. I'd just give them 2 days off, let them rest. And that whole year was spent just really with the pitching. I never really concerned myself with the other part of the club, just the pitching.
With Gary Nolan, Jack Billingham, and Don Gullett, the pitching staff that year had 3 15-game winners. But it was the 24-year-old Gullett who really stood out, losing only 4 times with an ERA of 2.42.
Don Gullett, he was the kid. He was the guy that I wanted on the mound at any time, every time. Second of all, he was a great athlete and a gutty kid, and he wanted the ball. He threw hard, got people out. I mean, there wasn't any tricks to it. He basically just said, here, hit it, and they couldn't hit it.
Fortunately, the Reds could hit it.
There's a drive into right center. That's in the gap. This may score a row. It's deep down the field, going way back, way back. That is a home run.
In the championship series that year, the Reds rolled over the Pittsburgh Pirates in 3 games and moved on to their 3rd World Series in 6 seasons. This time, their opponents were the Boston Red Sox, and after splitting the first 2 games in Boston, the series shifted to Cincinnati for Game 3. That night, the Reds jumped out to a 5-1 lead on the strength of Johnny Bench's 2-run homer in the 4th. The Sox came back to tie the score, but the Reds eventually won the game in the 10th, thanks in part to a controversial play involving Ed Armbrister. The Sox contended that Armbrister interfered with Carlton Fisk, but the call stood, and the Reds went on to win that game and eventually took a 3-2 lead back to Boston. Game 6 was delayed for 3 days because of rain, and when it was finally played, the Reds overcame an early Boston advantage and took a 6-3 lead into the bottom of the 8th. But that just set the stage for former Red Bernie Carbo, who came to bat in the Boston 8th with 2 men on and 2 men out.
Deep center field, way back, way back. We're tied up.
From that point on, the 2 teams battled long into the night, staging one of the most dramatic games in World Series history.
They're tagging up the 3rd. Here comes the throw. It is in time. Well hit, right field, deep. Evans is going back near the wall. Oh, what a catch he made. What a catch by Dwight Evans.
Finally, in the 12th, Carlton Fisk put an end to the suspense with what is now considered the most dramatic home run in World Series history.
It 7th game in his 1975 World Series.
I'll never forget going to the bus that night. Rose came up and tapped me on the shoulder. I was walking up. He said, "Wasn't that the greatest game you have ever been in?" I told him, "Peter Edward, you are crazy." I said, "That game there you call the greatest game we've lost." And I said, "And I'm not going to sleep tonight." And you say that's the greatest game. He said, "Look, we'll win tomorrow." But that was the best game I've ever played in.
All the money's on the line and all the glory's on the line, and we're playing for them diamond rings, and we just hope that we can get Billy. He's a tough pitcher, and they got to get Don Gold, who's tough.
There's his blooper pitch. There it is. A high drive. He was waiting for that one. That one is gone over everything. And now we have another one-run ball game in this World Series.
Tony Perez's two-out, two-run homer in the 6th had narrowed an early Boston lead, and after the Reds tied the game in the 7th, Joe Morgan's two-out, 9th-inning hit put Cincinnati ahead 4-3. One inning later, the Reds were about to win their first World Championship since 1940.
There's a high fly ball. It should be all over. Geronimo's under it. And Cincinnati has won the World Championship, beating the Boston Red Sox 4-3. For the 115th time this season, this one belongs to the Reds, and it was a big one.
Right on, this is the biggest one I've ever played in, Marty. We've come from behind and looked like we're dead, but we never die. This is an unbelievable ball club, and I'm just so happy, man. I can't tell you how much, and Pete Rose is unbelievable.
Sparky kept revving us up in there, and the extra men tonight really stayed on everybody's case, and it was strictly a team effort.
We told Cincinnati before we left that they were going to be the champs, and we're the champs, number one.
The home run Tony Perez hit in Game 7 was typical of the times he ignited the engine of the Big Red Machine. There might have been bigger names on the Reds, but no one meant more to the team than Tony Perez.
Rose was leading the league in hitting. He was hitting 401. I was hitting 400 even or something on this particular day. So we were standing around the cage and we're feeling pretty good about ourselves. You know, we're hitting pretty well. So Perez had just struck out the night before with, winning run on base. So he was in the batting cage where he hits the ball. We said, that's about 24 hours too late, Tony, and we laughed. And Tony came out of the cage. He was real upset. He said, "I tell you something." He said, "You and Rose, you hit 400, you hit 401. You don't make us win." He said, "When the big dog hits, we win. Your job, get on base. I drive you in."
You want to win, and you have a winning team, you have to have one guy who come out with a big hit with 2 outs. I was very confident on myself. And every time I go to the play and I see Morgan or Rose in second, they're going to get on me. They're going to say, "Hey, I got in second for you." Morgan going to say, "Tony, you're still second and you leave me here." It's we joke around like that. And I came through a lot of times because thinking like that at the plate.
I look back now at my years. He's the greatest single leader I was ever around. He was the only person that could tell Bench something, he could tell Rose something, he could tell anybody something. They used to say that he was the one for the Latin players. That's not so. That is the biggest misunderstood thing there ever was. Tony Perez was the #1 leader on that club because he had everybody's attention. And whenever he said something, people listened.
By 1976, people were listening intently to the exploits of the Big Red Machine, which now included Ken Griffey in right field, who was in the process of hitting over 300 3 straight years. Add to that Cesar Geronimo in center, who was on the verge of becoming another of the Reds' 300 hitters, and George Foster in left, who was about to embark on the first of his 3 straight 100 RBI seasons, and you could see a machine in perfect working order. Those Reds were a special team, one that we may never see the likes of again. And in fact, we may also never see the likes of a better all-around player than Joe Morgan during the 1975 and 76 seasons. That's when Morgan was named the league's most valuable player 2 years in a row, an honor which earned him the respect and admiration of his equally talented teammates.
Joe Morgan was probably the finest player that I've ever played with as far as being able to win a ball game. He had the ability to get a walk, steal a base, and he had the ability to get the big hit, and he had the ability to hit the ball out of the ballpark. He was such a amazing weapon, I guess you might say, in a sense of winning ball games. He had such an intensity, he had such knowledge of the game.
I told him when we got him after talking with him for a while, I said, I'm going to try something with you because I believe what I see in you is correct. I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to play you without ever giving you a sign until you prove me different. He never proved me different. There's no other second baseman ever in the history of this game could ever do the things he could do, and never will.
As for the Reds in '76, there may never be another team that will accomplish what they did either, going through the postseason with an unblemished record.
We were in Philadelphia the day before the playoffs, and I made a statement. I went out on a limb. I said, we're all healthy now. I said, before the end of this week, this team is going to show you something that you've never seen before. I just had that feeling because all the parts were in working order. We didn't have anyone injured. Everyone was hot. And to me, we still had the 8 best players ever put on the field.
1 ball and no strikes on Griffey. Underwood with a slow come down to the belt. He throws. Griffey swings. Slow chopper right side. Here comes Concepcion. And the 1976 pennant belongs to the Reds. Pandemonium down on the field as the Reds have scored 3 in the 9th inning and have swept the Philadelphia Phillies to move into the 1976 World Series.
And then when we go to the World Series, we know nobody going to have a chance to play against us because when you got players like we did in 76, but they confident, forget it, you don't have a chance. And we just go out there and beat New York just like we play anybody who know they're going to lose.
In the World Series that year, it was Johnny Bench who made certain the Yanks would lose in 4 straight, hitting .533 with 2 homers and 6 RBIs.
Get out of here! Get out of here! How about that? Boys, I got news for you. We're going to be world champions again, Sugar Bear. I got news for you. We are now going to be world champions again. You know, if our big men don't swing, what do? We die. We die. We're not going to die. We don't play that way. Hey, Dougie, old baby now! Hey, John! We're world champs, man.
This club here is the greatest club that's come down the pike for one reason. They got more class than any other baseball team has ever had.
They dressed when you left to go on a road trip. They looked like they all came out of Esquire. It became a thing on the club that they tried to outdress each other.
We enjoyed each other and we shared with each other, and when it come game time, though, that was a different matter. We were business on the field. We liked the way people stopped and watched us take batting practice, watched us take infield.
I think the Reds were an intimidating team in that it was a big red machine. Pitchers were intimidated because they knew if they made mistakes, they could be out of the ball game real quick. That's what professional sports is all about anyway. You intimidate your opponent. It gives you an edge. If you can't intimidate them, then you're pretty much even.
We were killers. We basically knew how to win. If we were 1 or 2 runs down, the other team was in trouble. They knew that, and we knew it as well.
They were so good that they said, we will not bring our standards down. Everybody will have to try to reach us, and they'll never catch us. Because if they come close, we'll go further ahead. And that's what I liked so much about them.
It had taken them half a decade of sweat and heartache, of dreams and talent. But the Big Red Machine had unquestionably risen to be the best team in baseball.
If there's doubt and you're cold, don't you worry what the future holds. We gotta have heroes to teach us all to never give up on your dream. Crazy notions to never lose. It'll take a long, long time before they fill your shoes. It'll take somebody who's a lot like you, who never gave up on a dream. No, you never gave up on a dream. You never, never, never gave up on a dream.
The Reds were
Always a team that made things happen, and we're always hustling. I think that has a lot to do with the reason there's a lot of players out of Cincinnati, because they grew up watching the Big Red Machine. You know, guys like that were very important to a youngster who was really serious about baseball.
No one knew it at the time, but when Tony Perez was traded after the 1976 season, the Big Red Machine would soon come to a grinding halt. In the years that followed, Sparky Anderson, Pete Rose, and Joe Morgan would move on too, eliminating 3 more important cogs of the machine. But that's not to say that the team totally fell apart. In fact, with Perez's departure, George Foster emerged, hitting 52 homers and driving in 149 runs in 1977. That same year, Tom Seaver came from the Mets in a trade, and a season later threw the first no-hitter by a Red at Riverfront. 2 years later, in 1979, the Reds won their 6th divisional title of the 70s. But in 1981's strike-shortened season, they failed to make the playoffs, despite having baseball's best record. Then, in 1982, the Reds lost 100 games for the first time in team history, and the atmosphere was even more melancholy at Riverfront in 1983, on the night the Reds honored Johnny Bench. Right from the start of his career in 1967, it was obvious that Bench possessed an enormous amount of talent. And throughout the 17 seasons that he took his place behind home plate, he never failed to rise above the rest. As a defensive catcher, Johnny Bench had no equal, and probably never will.
It was just catch it and put it down, catch it and put it down. I mean, he had a knack and he was quick as a cat. I mean, I think you got to throw away the mole. He might be the best catcher that ever played the game.
I talked to Casey Stengel about it one time, and I asked him, and he said, you know, he had seen Dickie, he had seen Hartman, he'd seen all the great ones. And I just asked him, I said, Casey, is he as good as I think he is? He said, I have never in my lifetime, and I don't believe you ever will in your lifetime, ever see anybody that could handle a glove like he handles it. Johnny Bench would be the best player at his position that anybody ever was. In other words, no man will ever play shortstop, second base, first, outfield as Johnny Bench caught.
One thing is for sure, no man ever hit more home runs as a catcher than Johnny Bench. Twice he led the league, and his 327 career homers as a catcher are an all-time best. Fittingly, Bench would go out in style on his night, when he gave an adoring crowd that included his parents a going-away present they'll always remember.
There it is. He's to left. Cruz going back. And it's gone. Oh, my. A home run for Bench on his night. Look at John. Number 389. And this crowd capacity is going crazy.
By 1984, the Reds were beginning to show some signs of rebounding, especially Mario Soto, an explosive strikeout pitcher who was on his way toward a career-high 18 wins. There were also some familiar faces at Riverfront. For one, Tony Perez was back in a Reds uniform after a 7-year absence. And then on the night of August 17, 1984, Cincinnati welcomed back its favorite son, when Pete Rose returned as player manager.
You talk about an area being happy and a city in all its glory. Well, that's Reds country in Cincinnati tonight. History being made. Pete Rose, player manager. Base hit. Pete Rose has a base hit. Reedus will score. The ball by Dernier. Rose is racing around second. Rose digging for third. There's that head first slide. And this crowd goes bananas.
First time up, back in the Reds uniform, rips it in for an RBI. Hustle is back right here at Riverfront.
Not only was hustle back at Riverfront, so was winning, as Rose turned the Reds around the only way he knew how, leading by example. Even at the age of 43, Rose would settle for no less than all out. something he did even as a kid when he learned his baseball at Cincinnati's Western Hills High School. Eventually, Rose would sign with the Reds in June of 1960, and from then on, his career has been pure legend. His list of mosts and firsts and bests are almost too long to recite and too trivial to measure his greatness. There are some who say that Pete Rose is the best player the game has ever seen, a man blessed with the perfect mix of talent, desire, hustle, inspiration, and leadership.
I think the best thing that ever happened to me is to be able to locker next to Pete Rose. Pete Rose was a great player. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind or anyone else's mind, but Pete Rose was not a great hitter, he was not a great runner, he was not a great defensive player. But if you watched him do all those things, he was great at them. He did not have a strong arm, he did not have a lot of range, he could not run real fast, but he always ran as fast as he could. Every day was like the 7th game of the World Series.
If you work hard and you have fun doing it like I have, playing baseball all these years and hitting the baseball, and if you play yourself in the position to be number one in something instead of being number two, go ahead and do it. And my philosophy is if you're number two, don't be satisfied because you got one space to make up.
True to his word, Rose would never settle for second best. So as his playing career neared an end, Rose set his sights on passing Ty Cobb as baseball's all-time hit leader.
Your hit total just grows and grows. Hey Pete, hey Pete, you sure do a job, sure do a job. Won't be long before you catch old Ty Cobb. Old Ty Cobb. Hey 14, 14, what can we say? What can we say? Gonna up and take his title away.
Rose would eventually catch Cobb, with the tying hit coming at Wrigley Field on September 8, 1985. Finally, the moment had arrived. After countless swings and blisters too many to number, Pete Rose would return to Cincinnati on the doorstep to immortality.
He levels it bat a couple of times. Shao kicks and he fires. Rose swings. There it is! There it is! Get out! Get out! All right! Hit number 4192. A line drive single into left center field. A clean base hit. And it is pandemonium here at Riverfront Stadium. The fireworks exploding overhead. The Cincinnati dugout has emptied. The applause continues unabated.
And then this kept going and going. This was like after 6 minutes, and I said, well, maybe you need somebody to lean on or something. So I went up there, and that's when he broke down. But he said he looked up, and he could see his dad. And I was just glad I was there to shake his hand and give him the shoulder he needed at one time.
What you really saw in the course of 8 minutes, I believe, was 3 generations of Pete Roses. 1, me getting hit. 2, me thinking about my father, and 3, my son Pete coming out to congratulate me.
I was standing there clapping, and I seen him start to cry. So a couple of players said, go out there, he needs you and stuff like that. Me and my dad were not too much about hugging and stuff, and I didn't. I was a little nervous to go out there. But when I went out there, I hugged him. I got chills and little tears, and he said that I'll beat his record, and hopefully it'll come true.
I love the city and they love me, and the fans and Cincinnati, the way they treat me over the years. My wife loved the city, and we just have fun just to be in Cincinnati.
For the Reds, the 1986 season was to be a continuation of a new era, which had begun to unfold around Christmas of 1984. That was when Marge Schott gained control of the Reds and lived up to her promise of providing an entertaining team on the field for fans to watch.
I've sat outside now for every game for almost 3 years. The thing we have are the fans. And believe you me, when you travel, and most of our fans travel 3 to 12 hours to a game with their children, you better give them entertainment, you better make them feel welcome. It's entertainment, and that's who you need, are the fans.
Recently, Reds fans have been entertained by some of the most exciting players in baseball, like Dave Parker, who in 1984 returned to the town he grew up in, and a year later led the league with 125 RBIs. In 1987, Parker was one of 5 Reds who were raised in Cincinnati, including third baseman Buddy Bell and second baseman Ron Oster. Of course, not all of the Reds' talent is homegrown. For one, there's John Franco of Brooklyn, whose 29 saves in 1986 signaled his emergence as one of baseball's top relievers. For another, there's Eric Davis, although the Reds expect that baseball's brightest young star will make Cincinnati his home away from home for years to come, and someday be remembered as the one player who started up the Big Red Machine a second time around. But like the Big Red Machine of the 70s, Davis won't be able to do it alone. And judging from the Reds' mix of talent, both young and old, he won't have to. The stars of today, the heroes of times gone by. From Riverfront Stadium to Crosley Field to the pastures of Cincinnati. The Cincinnati Reds have had a heritage unmatched in the history of the game. Baseball's oldest team. A franchise rich in tradition.
At his bat now. That's Silkfoot. Suki, taking on a lot of weight this spring.
We've got a big job on our hands. We've got to put Cincinnati in the race this year, and we're going to do it.
I sure never expected to pitch 2 no-run games in a row.
See how hard was it winning the batting title being a switch hitter? Well, Chuck, it's been a lot of work, and I think I have to thank my father for making me a switch hitter at the age 10, and also I'd like to thank all the people of Cincinnati who've just been behind me all year.
And it's very particularly wonderful to be here on this glorious celebration of the 100th anniversary of professional baseball in one of baseball's greatest cities, the city of Cincinnati. Cincinnati is number 1. And the home of the brave. Eat your heart out, Eddie.
I don't know what to say. This is something I never think is going to happen to me. When I started my career back in 1960.
Fly ball, left field, it's hit deep. Going back, McReynolds, out of